now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Bride of Dracula. Goddess Next Door and John Haynes team up to take on the Dark Vampire Lord in this action-packed Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Bride of Dracula in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers today. In the aftermath of a poorly executed and failed diversity initiative, which many call SJW Marvel, Marvel Comics is launching what they call a Fresh Start Initiative. And under this Fresh Start Initiative, new editor in chief C.B. Cebulski proposes to launch a new series of new #1 issues featuring many of the classic Marvel characters like Peter Parker as Spider Man, Tony Stark as Iron Man, Steve Rogers as Captain America, Thor, Odin's son, as the Mighty Thor, and Bruce Banner as the Hulk. And it looks like on the surface, when you look at the promotional image for the Fresh Start Initiative, Marvel Comics is looking like it's getting ready to go in a direction that correlates with their Marvel Cinematic Universe and something that synergizes with the Marvel Cinematic Universe that allows new readers to see the characters from the movies in the comics. However, when I take a panoramic look at this so-called Fresh Start Initiative, I start to see what's really rotten behind it, because when I take a look at it more critically and the creative teams that are being assigned to some books, it looks like Marvel Comics still has not learned its lesson regarding what led to them losing almost 90% of its reading audience and alienating so many readers that they walked away from Marvel Comics publications overall. Now, the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. And in the comic book industry, there have been lots of insane people running not only Marvel Comics, but DC Comics, Image Comics, and many other publishers, because they continue to apply the same failed approaches of the late 1990s to today. And when I take a look at the bigger picture as related to Marvel Comics, and I see what's going on behind the scenes as related to this Fresh Start Initiative, that's where I really start to smell the hot garbage. Because with this Fresh Start Initiative, instead of going out and trying to find some veteran writers or some seasoned writers who understand and love comics, we see Marvel's editor C.B. Cebulski going out and hiring Nick Spencer, a man who led to the complete collapse of Captain America with that Secret Empire, on The Amazing Spider-Man. And we see Ta-Nehisi Coates, the writer of Black Panther, a man who led to the complete collapse of the Black Panther, writing Captain America. So it looks like the direction Marvel is going in is the exact same direction that they went in before, by using the same writers who led to the complete decline in sales to write new books. Now, that's the definition of insanity as I see it. When somebody has proven that they have failed, you don't go out and hire them and put them on A-list characters. If they could not handle B and C-list characters like Ta-Nehisi Coates did with Black Panther, you don't give them an A-list character like Captain America. And when somebody bungles one of the premier characters like Captain America, like Nick Spencer did, you don't put him on your flagship character, the most popular character in your brand, The Amazing Spider-Man. That's just complete insanity as I see it from a business perspective. No, what I would do in order to try to rally the fans behind things is try to find one of these veteran writers like a David Michelinie or one of these other writers out here who has experience with Spider-Man, and ask them to do a couple of issues for a year so that readers can reconnect with this character and see what's great about it. Because you need a veteran writer to come in and really reestablish this character and reestablish their reputation so that readers can feel confident about buying that book again. And with many Marvel comics, they desperately need a new crop of writers. And they need, really, as I see it, an editor with a vision to direct the company and set a course for the company in the 21st century. Because, as I see it, Marvel Comics has seriously missed an opportunity to expand its audience, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe pulling in billions of dollars every year, and movies like Black Panther being blockbusters at the box office. All those people who saw those movies want to go to a comic shop to go buy comics, But when they go there and read some of these comics and see how terrible they are, they have no incentive to go out here and buy those comics anymore, because after one bad issue and one bad impression, they no longer have an incentive to go out here and buy comic books. And this is something that it seems like the editorial at Marvel hasn't understood since the early 2000s. Now, that's where the core problem was at Marvel Comics and continues to remain at Marvel Comics, is that the editorial department there has no real vision and no real direction. I mean, I remember right after the Heroes Return comics came out with George Perez and all these premier teams, I started to see the complete collapse of Marvel start, because once Kurt Busiek and George Perez left Iron Man, they put on a secondary team and the book went straight downhill. The same thing happened when Kurt Busiek left the Avengers in 2001, and that book went into complete collapse. And the same thing happened when Mark Waid left Captain America and then Dan Jurgens took over. The book went into complete collapse. And the editorial just didn't understand what was going on as related to transition, because when you have one creative team leave and another one come on, you really need to have something called an organic transition. And this is something that seasoned editors knew how to do back in the day. I remember back when Bill Messner-Loebs was transitioning from Loebs to Mark Waid, how seamless that transition was, and how we didn't see any difference in how Wally West was as the Flash from writer to writer. And the same thing happened with Mark Gruenwald when he started his run of Captain America. We saw no real significant difference in the character. New creative team came on, and the book continued to flow smoothly from one issue to the next. The big problem was in 2001, after Kurt Busiek left and Iron Man and the Avengers, those books started to drop, and the same thing happened when Mark Waid left Captain America, and the same thing happened on Fantastic Four. All four of those books suffered because no one knew how to transition organically, and the way you transition organically is you start to slowly let people get to know a new writer. You slowly let a new artist get to know the audience get to know a new artist, and this was done during the Gruenwald run of Captain America, where we had Ron Lim coming in, and he did a fill-in on a Acts of Vengeance issue, and then later on became the regular penciler for Kieran Dwyer. Once people saw Ron Lim's art style and started to get used to it, and they saw that they liked it, and they got a good response, they let him come on as the regular penciler. Same thing with Jim Lee on the X-Men back in the 80s. It was an organic transition in that they let Jim Lee do one issue or two issues, and then later on, after Mark Silvestri started doing less books, they brought him in full time. And this is a big problem with the industry, is that they just don't know how to transition from one creative team to the next. And instead of working on how to deal with the issue of transition, what they do is they call themselves rebooting every couple of years with a new #1 issue, not really dealing with the issue of transition. And I look at this fresh start as another component of that insanity, in that here we have C.B. Cebulski applying the same failed approaches that did not work for the Heroes Return, for Joe Quesada's New Avengers, or for Marvel Now, or for any of these so-called relaunches, because the big problem is that these books start out great with a fresh creative team, but then these editors just don't know how to transition from one creative team to the next. And I saw this with Mark Waid and Chris Samnee's Daredevil, where the book was building strong momentum. The book was very strong. It was very well crafted. One of the best Daredevil runs in history so far for the 2000s, up there with your Brian Michael Bendis, who did a fairly good job on Daredevil, but I'd say Wade's was a lot better. And instead of trying to keep that momentum going, what they did was they ended it at 36 and then started a new #1 issue. You don't do that when you're a comic book publisher. when you're a comic book publisher, you need to build momentum and you need to keep momentum going, because the issue that's in somebody's hand not only sells the next issue, it also sells the back issues. And in order for people to go out here and have an incentive to buy trades and buy the next issue, you need to keep the series going. And this is a big problem that the comic book industry suffers from, because many of these creative people, again, they just don't know how to transition from one creative team to the next, and they don't know how to keep that momentum going and to continue to build on that heat and use that heat as a way to draw people into buying the books. When you know how to do that, you can build the audience. And every time Marvel starts to build work towards momentum to build the audience, they wind up canceling everything, and that stops the momentum from going, and it stops the audience cold. And then the audience decides they're frustrated because they just got into these characters and now they have to stop. And that's something that really aggravates a lot of readers. And what really aggravated a lot of readers is that they just had another Marvel Now event, and then we had this diversity initiative where they launched this, what many call SJW Marvel, where they got rid of all of our favorite characters that we were following for over 70 years, replaced them with these diversity characters who no one knew or cared about, and then they wrote terrible stories. And the thing is that those books wound up alienating people because they had built up years of frustration with all of these reboots and relaunches they've had to deal with ever since 1997. I mean, over the last 20 years, Marvel has rebooted at least about 5 or 6 times, or even more than that, and DC Comics has rebooted at least 6 or 7 times. And it's annoying for a reader of comics to sit there and have to continue to deal with numerous reboots, because people in editorial just don't know how to organically transition from one creative team to the next. They don't know how to maintain momentum, and they don't know how to get people excited about their books. This is a big problem in the comic book industry as related to editorial overall. And when I take a look at C.B. Cebulski's approach, it looks no different than Axel Alonso's approach, or even Dan Dido's approach at DC Comics, in that they are applying the same approach that has failed for over 20 to 25 years and still expecting to get the big audiences of the 1990s. And that's just not going to happen, because when we take a look at the panoramic picture as related to the comic book industry, one of the big problems that the industry has that keeps those audiences from coming in is distribution. So you can relaunch these series 1, 2, 300 times, but if no one can buy them because most comics are sold in comic book stores, then no one knows where they are. Outside of Amazon and trade paperbacks, that's the only place where the general audience can find comics, because recently the outside distribution to places like Barnes & Noble has been cut off at Marvel and DC. So those type of books no longer exist anymore. So the only place you can get a comic these days is at a comic book store, and that's the way it's been for the majority of titles out there. You can only get them at comic shops, and you can only get trades at Amazon. So I look at the industry, and they keep relaunching, trying to appeal to an audience that does not know it exists. And this was the big problem with SJW Marvel, as many people call it. They were trying to appeal to those audiences of color and those audiences of the LGBT community, but those people don't go to comic book stores. Those people don't buy comic books on the regular, and in many cases, they don't understand that comic books still even exist. If you ask some of those people, do they know if a comic book still exists? A lot of them don't even know, and a lot of kids who are Gen Y and millennials don't even know that comic books exist, because comics are not sold in places like drugstores, like supermarkets, like grocery stores. most comics don't exist in those venues, and many managers don't even know that they exist in those venues, thanks to Diamond's monopolistic distribute control over the distribution system. And this is something that many just can't get through their heads regarding the comic book industry. The industry's problems have to do with editorial and distribution and marketing. And while people know about these characters in film, they just don't know where to get these comics. And then the content of the comics is so bad that these comics just can't generate any word of mouth outside of roasts by people like your Diversity in Comics and Captain Cummings and your many others who will make videos about comics. They are literally the only advertising that many of these horrible comics like the America series get. Those books usually that's the only press they would get, because in a world where we have over 5 million publications published almost every year, people have to generate strong word of mouth if they hope to go out here and sell books. This is something many of the editors at Marvel don't understand, because when I look at many of the editors' backgrounds, they are not in the efforts of trying to promote to large audiences. They think that they can turn this into some sort of club or some sort of enclave, not understanding that publishing is a business, and it's a business with a razor thin profit margin. That means the books that sell in the large numbers pay for the books that lose. And what's happening at Marvel is that their editors don't understand this tenet of publishing, and they're going out here and launching books that can't generate an audience, like your Unstoppable Wasps, like your America comic book with America Chavez, like your Dan Slott Spider-Man, like your Riri Williams Iron Man. These books just can't generate sales because they're terrible books, and the main character in them is so unlikable that they cannot generate the word of mouth, which will allow them to build momentum and reach larger audiences of new readers. Because when people take a look at this comic and they see the splash page like Brian Michael Bendis has there with Riri Williams just talking on, and that doesn't give a comic book reader an incentive to buy comics, because comic books are supposed to be big action. It's supposed to be exploding with action. That splash page needs to do something. It needs to have the main character featured in some sort of action where they are using their powers or they are getting ready to do something. That's what a good splash page does. A splash page gets us into the comic and then has us turning the second page and the third page. And you have to sell a comic within the first 3 to 5 pages if you want somebody to pick that comic book up. And this is something many of your editors, like your Heather Antos and many others, just don't understand about the business of comic books. Comic books sell with action. They sell by having stories that feature action. It has to be big, it has to be bold, it has to be dynamic, and it has to grab that reader within that first 3 to 5 pages. And this is a problem I see with many comics when I'm looking at comics online, in that they don't do this. They don't know how to build to a strong story. The only one I've seen so far that has been able to do this was Dan Mendoza's Zombie Tramp, and that was a book a lot of people dismissed, but I look at him and he knows what he's doing as related to selling a comic. His comics are well done, and the action flows from page to page, and you get compelled to continue buying more books and reading more books. Now, they need him at Marvel because his type of storytelling is what they used to have at old school Marvel. And when I take a look at this Fresh Start initiative, I just don't see the talent there to create a fresh start. I see more of a false start, in that the company is trying to patch things up in the hopes of avoiding Disney doing a house cleaning. That's what I see overall as related to Marvel Comics. I don't see a fresh start. I see the same characters, classic characters, getting ready to continue pushing the same SJW type storylines that alienated people. I don't see a fresh start. A real fresh start would introduce us with stories focused on big action, writers with a vision towards setting things right, and a whole staff of people filled with energy, passion, and enthusiasm. You can't get that type of passion and enthusiasm just with a new boss. A lot of people think, oh, we get rid of Axel Alonso and bring in CB Cebulski. No, you're going to really have to really get rid of many of the unprofessional people who have plagued Marvel for the last couple of years. A lot of that negative energy that it came from them is still there in those Marvel editorial offices and still in the as related to the creative people at Marvel Comics. And you really need to do a complete purge of those people if you hope to save this brand, because this brand, as on the publishing side, is severely damaged. When you lose 90% of your readership, you are getting ready to go out of business as a publisher. Again, publishing has a razor thin profit margin, and if you don't have the books selling in the 300 to 400,000s like the X-Men used to do to pay for the books that lose, like the lower tier books at Marvel at the time, the Darkhawks, the New Warriors, and the other lower tier books, you're not going to be able to stay in business for long, because that's how publishing works. The A books usually pay for the books that lose or the books that don't catch on, because when you're a publisher, your top selling books are the ones that you really want to focus on. And Marvel, the X-Men is not the franchise it used to be. It's not the A franchise it used to be. Spider-Man is not the A franchise it used to be. The Hulk is literally non-existent. He was another A character. Iron Man lost its ability to be an A character due to the mishandling of Tony Stark and then transitioning into this Riri Williams, because he was an opportunity. Here is one of the most popular characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he should be up there as an A character. Same thing with Black Panther right now. Same thing with Captain America. Those should be A characters, but they get downgraded back to B and C due to the publisher not being able to set a direction for those characters and put a creative team on those books that will allow new readers to come in from the movies to the comics. And this is the big problem, again, the Fresh Start Initiative. They just don't have the staff, and they've made no efforts to go out and find new people to write these books. It's literally like shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic when you go out and get the exact same people who failed on one book to go write another book. Now, it's nice to give people second chances, but when people have proven that they cannot succeed on a B or a C character, then it's time to let them go. They had their opportunity, and it's now time to bring in a new voice, new vision, and new talent. And I see so much great new talent out there in the indies that is not pushing identity politics, is not pushing political agendas, and is focused on telling great stories. But those people are on the sidelines, and they should be working at Marvel. And I look at Marvel overall, and again, they need a new editor-in-chief, and they need somebody to be given power by Disney to remove a lot of this staff that is toxic and replace it with some young, hungry talent. Because I see all that young, hungry talent out in the indies and on YouTube right now, and I see that energy that they have and that passion they have, and I would love to bring that type of passion back to comics. I'd love to bring some of that talent in to comics, because those people really want to publish great stories and give the reader the type of story that they can get excited about. There is an audience out there for comics, and there are people waiting on the sidelines, but when they take a look at editorial not having any sort of vision and launching another gimmick relaunch, they don't see an incentive to go out here and buy comic books. What people are waiting for is what I have said in numerous videos. They are waiting for someone to come in and have that grand vision for comics. Someone like Jim Shooter used to be, with that passion, that drive, that energy that radiates throughout the office and gets everybody excited about comics, and someone who will teach the craft of comics to the next generation of creative people. Axel Alonso was not that person. Neither was Joe Quesada. Neither one was the kind of guy to be like a Jim Shooter, a guy who set a direction for the company, a guy who mentored young, fresh talent and helped them learn the ins and outs of the craft of comics, and someone who would teach what is about keeping the catalog and the characters consistent. This is a big problem I have with many of today's comic creators, is that many of them are full of themselves. Many of them don't understand what professionalism is. And we see that on social media with many of the ways of these Marvel creators have been behaving. I mean, in a Jim Shooter era, I doubt that would go on. And even at my SJS Direct, if it had been building up and had been more popular, it wouldn't be going on with me, because my standard is this. I want to make sure that my people are professional because they represent my products. And that standard should be at Marvel Comics, in that you are not representing yourself on social media. If you are working on our products, you are working on Marvel characters. You represent those characters, you represent their stories, and the way you act should reflect positively on those characters. As long as we have creative people acting a fool on social media and alienating people, that's not, things really aren't going to change, because their negative energy and their negative attitude is sucking the life out of things and giving those outside customers, especially the casuals, less reason to go out here and buy comics. When they see a guy going on a Trump rant or cursing out a comic fan, that's the height of unprofessionalism. And this person is still working at Marvel, still pushing that negative energy, and still they're alienating customers. So nothing has really changed. And that's why I call this fresh start a false start, because this fresh start really is not about really being serious. And this is another big problem as related to the comic book industry, is that no one seems to be really serious about change. With this industry on the brink of collapse, people continue to apply the same approaches and expect things to change. That's why I say things have to go to a rock bottom, because I look over at Marvel and they're talking about a fresh start, doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. And then you look at DC and we have Dan Dido continuing to do this exact same thing and expect a different result with this Rebirth event, because here he is doing the exact same thing he did when he first came to DC, canceling books that have good momentum and good energy, like Super Sons, like Supergirl, and Action and Superman, which really got their original numbering back. All things that would lead to people having an incentive to go out here and buy comics. He cancels all those books and then decides to give them all new number ones, all because Brian Michael Bendis is coming to DC. And that's the wrong approach to go on. That's putting Brian Michael Bendis above Superman. And that's something, as an editor, I would never allow, because Superman as a character is supposed to be the priority, and no creator is supposed to be above Superman. When it comes down to Superman, if you want to work on this character, you need to show me that your attitude is this. You're going to make Superman number one, and you're going to reflect putting a positive image of Superman up there. And I don't see that with Brian Michael Bendis, who had an opportunity to elevate an A-list character, and then he winds up destroying it in Iron Man. He showed me he had no skills in writing a good Iron Man comic book, and DC has now hired this guy to be on Superman. And Dan Dido is making the exact same mistake he made back when he canceled Robin and Nightwing books back in the early 2000s, which were selling in the six figures. He decided to cancel those books, kill their momentum, and he's doing the exact same thing with Superman right now. And that's the definition of insanity on the DC side, which has been completely insane ever since Dan Dido took it over. And I look at the big picture as related to the big two, and I don't see things changing. People continue to apply the exact same approaches, and they continue to expect 1990s numbers, not looking at the bigger picture as related to distribution, as related to professionalism, and related to social media and to marketing. And I look at this picture, and everybody's sitting there thinking that there's going to be change, but you can't get change when you continue to apply the same approaches and expect a different result. What comics really need, as I see it on both the Marvel and the DC side, in order to save the industry, is they need a fresh infusion of new blood, they need a fresh infusion of new talent, and they need somebody with a real, serious publishing background who understands how trade publishing works in order to get this ship right. This is a long game, this is a marathon, and I see many of these comic book publishers like Marvel and DC having editors there who are still trying to sprint to the finish line and then wondering why they keep running out of gas. And I look at C.B. Cebulski, and it looks like another sprinter who just doesn't understand the mechanics of a marathon. And that's why I look at this fresh start as just another false start. If you'd like to try some of my SJS Direct publications, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, The Temptation of John Haynes, and the Spinsterella trilogy, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. And if you want to help me pay for the covers for the SJS Direct 2018 catalog, you can send me a donation to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.